the subtitle of this, or the title of this lesson, really summarizes, I think, what Proverbs says. The person with a short temper is a fool. A person who's angry all the time is a fool, in the proverbial sense of the term. That means that he is not walking in the fear of the Lord, but is walking in his own way. He is not walking in righteousness, but he is walking in wickedness. So Proverbs 14, verse 29 is where I want to start. And before I pull the verse up, just a quick reminder of the various kinds of proverbs, because I'm going to have you identify. The proverb there, we have repeating proverbs, which says basically the same thing. The first and second lines say basically the same. Contrasting, they offer different views. Often it's nearly an opposite, but it is a different perspective of the same idea. Developing adds new information, it adds significant information to it. So the first line is then added to, developed by the second. Illustrating proverb, it uses figures of speech to embellish, to make the point more memorable, more picturesque. A building proverb starts with one line and then adds, based on what the previous line says, and then adds based on that. So there's this progression. Usually it's longer than two lines, so there's a development or progression through the proverb. A pivoting is often 3 lines or more, and the middle line turns a proverb. So the first line relates to the middle line, the third line relates to the middle line. A mirroring statement just restates the same idea, but it puts it it reverses the order. So the last thing said of the first line is the first thing said in the second line. Cause and effect just says very simply, if you do this, this will happen. And then there's the formal proverbs. It's just simply really a statement. The parallelism is not as obvious. It's just simply a statement of truth there. So those are the kinds of proverbs. What kind of proverb is Proverbs 14:29? He who is slow to wrath has great understanding, but he who is impulsive exalts folly. Yep, that's a contrasting, and how do we know that? Yep, the word but clues us in that there's a contrast going on here. And so we have, some very obvious parallels. The he and the he, very obviously parallel to one another. The is slow, so describing this one, what kind of person he is contrasted with what? Yeah, he who is impulsive. So we have and I know this is not the full sentence here, but he who is slow is contrasted with he who is impulsive. And the one is slow to what? To wrath. There. And so that now as we're contrasting these two lines, you have the one slow to wrath is contrasted with the impulsive one, which points us to this. The impulsiveness is not just he's an impulsive shopper, but rather he is, I would say, quick to anger. He is ready to lose his temper, always on the verge of flying off the handle. That one that is just, you walking on eggshells around because you never know what's going to set him off. That's the kind of person. So these two lines, they help us interpret each other, so that we know the slowness is directed to anger, and the impulsiveness is also directed towards anger. And then the next two verbs or action words here there's a contrast even in the use. So we have the has, but there's no, he who is impulsive has, but rather he does. And this often happens as we're talking through the Proverbs, that an idea in the first line is in the second, it's just not stated there. And so the one who is slow to wrath has great understanding. Now, we're reading through the Proverbs, and we read that word understanding. What do we know that it is a synonym for? Wisdom. So this is just another way to say he who is slow to wrath is wise, has great wisdom. So not just has understanding. There is the description there. What kind of understanding? Or how much understanding? Great. He has much understanding. So the second one, he who is impulsive, who's quick to anger, he does something. Yeah, exalts folly. What is folly's relationship to understanding? They are complete opposites in the book of Proverbs. These are two different paths, two different ways of life. And so we have, just thinking through the proverb, we have two individuals who both have a reaction. One is a slow reaction, one is a quick reaction. And their reaction, the first one's reaction, reveals something about himself, reveals there's understanding in the person. The second one's action does something. So that this hothead is doing something. He's promoting folly here. So anger glamorizes folly. Really, in this one, that is the big point. That this is what the quick temper does. So that a quick temper elevates the status of folly. When you exalt something, you make it more important. You make it bigger. You make it more noteworthy. And in this case, I can rightly say you make it more notorious. It actually elevates folly. And a quick temper encourages the practice of folly. So that when you act in anger, when someone is a hothead, you see it and people imitate it. So we take any of these examples, the baseball manager kicking dirt on the umpire. I don't know who first did that. Jim might, but I don't know who first did that. But it's certainly something that was imitated. It was seen, and this one who's acting the part of the fool, the crazy man, I think Jim said, acting crazy. Others watch this. And in that case, it's nationally televised. And his folly is put on display, and it's seen by many as a good thing. I am certain that most people watching that did not look at it and say, man, that's such a shameful spectacle. He is showing off his own foolishness. He is showing that he lacks wisdom and patience and grace. They say, boy, I want to be like that. Kids go out and play baseball and they're kicking dirt on each other because they want to be like that guy. That's what we're talking about. That's what Proverbs is talking about. That this anger, it elevates it. And it may not be on the national stage like an athlete is, but in whatever circle of influence or sphere of friends that you may have, there's going to be this elevation of the status of foolish behavior so that others are going to see it and imitate it. At the very least, somebody's going to say, well, if he can get away with that, I can too. It also teaches us a quick temper entices others to be foolish. So it's going farther of what I've said. It encourages the practice of it, but it also, by its anger, it lays a stumbling block in front of others. There's a temptation there. Because if I suddenly get angry and I start yelling at Gene, the natural response is going to be for Gene to do what? Most cases. Okay, maybe get away from me. But there's also maybe just simply to respond in kind. If I lose my temper, it's very likely whoever I'm talking with is going to lose their temper back. And is that temptation to others. I literally am laying a stumbling block in front of them, ready to trip them into anger themselves. We also see simply that wisdom produces patience. The one with great understanding is slow to wrath. The patience there is the fruit of wisdom or understanding. And so the patient practices wisdom, the hothead promotes folly. That's just my own restatement of the verse. To deal with the temper, there must be genuine wisdom. There must be, in this case, understanding. And if you remember, wisdom and understanding are practically synonyms, but they do have some unique differences in their meaning and in the way that they are used. So that in wisdom, in Proverbs, wisdom is more or less skill in living. It's skill in living a moral, righteous life. Understanding is really the applied thought. I have information about the situation. I'm thinking well and wisely about all of this. There's information to hand that I'm thinking about. I'm thinking carefully about, so that then I can navigate skillfully through this particular situation. And I think in this case, an idea of understanding and the knowledge that is inherent in this kind of understanding is helpful to us, because as we think through the things that make us mad. And the things with all of this, or at least right now, with all of this, I am assuming sinful anger. I'm not denying the reality of righteous anger, but that's not in the scope of the conversation at this point. So the things that make us sinfully angry, understanding thinks about those things. So why does that pet peeve make you so mad? What's going on? And so there's part of it, just some honesty here. And most of the time it's really, well, it inconveniences me. A lot of times it boils down to that inconveniences me. Life is not being run the way I think it should be run, therefore I'm going to be angry. It's their fault because they're not doing things the way I want them to do it, therefore I have a right to be mad at them. And understanding things through that and whatever going on in your heart in that time, understanding also is thinking through who are you dealing with? What are you dealing with? So somebody actually, this is for me anyway, it's the easy example. Did somebody actually maliciously pull out in front of me with the intent of ruining my day? They saw me coming. Somebody posted outside the church and then calling them up, saying, he's coming down the road right now. Go get ready. 45, remember, 45 is the fastest you can go. No, there's none of that there, at least rarely there. There's none of that present. And so I can't look at it and say, there's a personal attack on me, number one. Number two, is there a reason that they are going maybe slower than I want to go or would go? Often, yes. Often there's some of it just, I like going faster than most people like going. And that's just that's the understanding. I enjoy speed, some don't. And then you drive by and realize, that person is of an advanced state of elderliness, and so that their reactions are probably not as quick. Their sight is probably not as sharp as it used to be. And so they are wisely compensating to slow down. Or, all right, there is snow on the road and my car is perfectly fine. I'm all-wheel drive with good snow tires and go through anything. I'm not worried about it, but their car's front-wheel drive and bald tires. They're a lot more concerned about it than I am. Understanding is, and especially in these situations, is legitimately thinking through what's actually happening. And then we get to the real real issue in understanding the fear of the Lord. Understanding that corrects a short temper is understanding that recognizes who God is. And so when somebody does something that I do not like, was that a random chance event? No, I would say probably not. I would say certainly not. Yeah, because God is sovereign over everything, including the people on the road, the people in the checkout line, my family, my neighbors. God is sovereign over everything. So those people were put there for a reason. But we also go to Romans chapter 8, and it works together for good. It is, so understanding says God is in control of all these things, of every life, of every individual, of every word, of every action, of every decision. He is sovereign, and He's working all of those things out for my good as His child. And it may be to see and to show you're not as patient as you thought you were. Or to, as Gene said, to practice, to build and grow in the patience, or to just simply bear the fruit of the patience that you've painfully learned along the way. But there is an understanding God is absolutely sovereign. This event is not accidental. It is intentional for my eternal good. Anger affects others in a wide variety of ways. When you think about that, when we lose our tempers, it encourages folly. It encourages others or tempts others to act sinfully. And so we think about anger, and I trust we recognize when we lose our temper, when we're sinfully angry, we often say and do things that hurt someone else. But there are other ripple effects of our anger, including how it encourages or entices others to do that which is foolish. And one of the applications of this is that anger does affect others, and often much more broadly than we think. Proverbs describes for us the angry man. It tells us the angry man acts foolishly. Proverbs 14, verse 17 is that simple. If you're angry, you are acting foolishly, and you're going to do foolish things. You do destructive things, counterproductive things, sinful things. Proverbs 25, 28. It's a very vivid proverb. It says, "Whoever has no rule over his own spirit is like a city broken down without walls." The angry man is defeated and defenseless. That's when the walls of a city would be broken down, isn't war. The army of the enemy would come in, they would surround the city, they would lay siege, they would begin to batter down the gates or the corners, to find the weak points, and would begin to break it down. And if you are in that culture, in a city, and you have no walls, you have no defense. The army of your enemy is very easily going to come in and overrun your city. So you are already defeated before you've even started. You're open to every attack. And an angry man is defenseless against the foolish expression of his own passions. He is defenseless against the temptation to respond selfishly. Proverbs 29 verse 22 says, an angry man stirs up strife, and a furious man abounds in transgression. The angry man, the one, we can say this, and even as we speak of the righteous anger of Christ, We know of several occasions where Christ responded with anger. We would never say he was an angry man. And that's part of the distinction that here the Proverbs is talking about, is this one that is angry. He is notorious for being angry. He is the short fuse. There, he is abounding in sin. The Moffat translation of this same verse, Proverbs 29:22, says, hot temper is the cause of many a sin. Hot temper is the cause of many a sin. Therefore, Proverbs 22, verse 24 says, make no friendship with an angry man, and with a furious man do not go, lest you learn his ways and set a snare for your soul. Therefore, do not be friends with the angry person. It's just that simple. If you know somebody who's always losing their temper, and if you have a choice in the matter, don't hang around them. Don't make them your friend. It's not, as Jim reminded us at the beginning, it's not cool to be losing your temper all the time. Don't be friends with the angry person. And this Proverbs gives us two reasons. First, you will learn his way. You begin to imitate the angry person. Let me give you a clear and hope very simple and readily understood example. The news. We watch the news, and I've seen it time and time again. Somebody who has the news playing all day long. I see inevitably two emotions, fear and anger. They're learning, and I say that because the news cycle now is driven by outrage. Somebody, and the anchors present it more calmly, but they're presenting all of these things intending to stir up emotions. And you keep filling your mind with that, you respond in anger. The same is true. The same is true with our friends. We spend our time around those who are quick-tempered. You're going to be much more likely to be quick-tempered. And in doing so, it sets a snare, sets a trap for your soul. See, what is at risk here is not social behavior, polite society, getting along well with others. What is at risk here is not questions of even of lawsuits or jail time. What ultimately is at risk here is your spiritual well-being. If anger is folly, if the angry man abounds in sin, then as you learn anger and you grow more angry, you are continually walking in that which is spiritually destructive to your own self. You're walking in a way which is contrary to God. And it does have dire personal consequences, so that anger is infectious and it can be lethal. And we can talk about that in a very literal sense. How many times people have been murdered because of somebody else's anger. But the Proverbs, again, is most concerned about the spiritual sense. So we know the way of folly leads to death. And so we must forsake anger. We go on and we say, therefore it is better to be alone than with an angry person. Proverbs 21, verse 19, it says, better to dwell in the wilderness than with a contentious and angry woman. And I'll remind you, as we're thinking about Proverbs and each of the individual Proverbs, there's a concrete situation. There's a specific example that is presented in the proverb. But many times that specific example is not to be limited only to that. So we can rightly, and I think we would recognize, would rightly and immediately say it's better to dwell in the wilderness than with a contentious and angry man. It's not just instruction to husbands here. I think we rightly would say it's instruction to husband and wives, but it's even broader than that. It's instruction with any of the relationships. Don't live with somebody that is angry. Well, in this case, I would say it's better to live alone than with somebody who is angry. And I would not say this is a command, move out, separate, get a divorce. I don't think that's commanded at all in this verse. But it is saying it is better to be alone. If you have a choice between marry this person who is angry or be alone, which should you choose? Be alone. You have a choice between I'm going to spend time hanging out with this person who is angry, or I'm going to be alone. Which should you choose? Be alone. And when you think about that, and I know loneliness is incredibly difficult. We saw during the pandemic, in fact, it became very apparent that loneliness is deadly. It shortens lives. However, Solomon says, Proverbs is teaching us that it's better to be lonely than to risk the spiritual consequences of living with an angry person or hanging around with an angry person. It's better to risk the loneliness, and there is cost there, and recognize, that's part of why this contrast here is important. He's telling us there's some, it's painful to be alone, but it's worse to be with the angry person. We're also told, respond to anger with gentleness. A soft answer turns away wrath. Responding to anger with gentleness. I will remind you, as well as we're thinking through the Proverbs, that these are principles. These are not absolute promises, so that we would say, generally speaking, a soft response, a gentle response is going to deflect anger. But it's not a promise that every time somebody loses their temper at you, if you respond gently and graciously and kindly, that they're going to calm down and stop being angry. There are times where it doesn't calm them down at all. And in fact, there's times where, and I don't think this is in your notes, but there are times where Proverbs indicates we should respond to folly, and I would say in this case the folly of anger, with harshness. So there's not even, I don't think this is even an absolute guide for every time you're confronted with an angry person that you should always be gentle. I think Proverbs indicates there is a time where you would need to respond with severity, not with anger, but with a harder response. And that's where wisdom and understanding are necessary to know when to respond with gentleness and when to respond with harshness. But generally speaking, respond with gentleness. Respond with patience. We've already touched on this. Proverbs 26, verse 4, also indicates there are times where we do not respond to anger, but we walk away. Do not answer a fool according to his folly, lest you also be like him. The angry man abounds in sin. He promotes folly. He is acting foolishly. Sometimes the right response is to say, basically, we're not having this conversation. The right response is to say, I'll talk to you later. Click. Even though we don't do that anymore. To hang up the phone. To walk away. To just not get into it. And again, wisdom is needed to understand these various responses of when it is the right time to respond with gentleness, with patience, with severity, or just with nothing, with leaving. Very quick description of anger. It's burdensome. It is cruel. It is destructive. Proverbs 27 verse 4 says, wrath is cruel and anger a torrent. Just this summer, these floods in Texas just swept down and wreaked so much havoc, took lives in just a short span of time. That's what he's saying. When he says a torrent, it is this raging flood that washes away stuff before it. And Derek Kidner said of the angry man, he knows no restraint and has no sense of proportion. The angry man responds usually all out of proportion. So really, does the person who's not going the speed that you're going, the person who doesn't put something where you think it belongs, the person who is acting in a way that just gets on your nerves, is it really deserving that you malign their character and their family and their intellect? Because they've made a different decision than you would make, do they really deserve whatever you are saying or thinking about them? No. I would say almost never. Is our angry response actually the proper proportion to what has happened? It's usually we are blowing it way out of proportion. The angry man is controlling, anger is controlling. So the one who is angry almost can't help himself. He's enslaved, and it brings him trouble, brings punishment on him. It stirs up strife. And the Proverbs 30 verse 33 says the pressing of the nose brings blood. And there's a play on words here, actually, because the same word that's translated anger in the Bible is also translated nose. And it uses the same phrase, the pressing of anger brings forth strife. So if I hit you, or if I smash your nose, it's going to bleed. If I push into anger, it's going to cause strife. Anger is a troublemaker, constant troublemaker. In contrast, self-control is true power. So, he who is slow to anger is better than the mighty, and he who rules his spirit than he who takes a city. And what kind of proverb is this? It's a repeating. It's a simple repeating proverb. As we talk about the developing proverbs and the building proverbs, particularly the developing proverb, in contrast to this, is adding a substantial information. And in this case, the mighty and he who takes a city, it's more specific than, it's a more specific form of a mighty one, but it's just a mighty one. It's not adding significant information. And so when you're talking about the developing proverb, we're not just talking about adding a little bit. We're talking about adding a considerable amount of information into the picture. So it's almost adding something that we didn't really see in the first line, in the first part there. So it is confusing as we think through the differences there, because the repeating and the developing and the building seem very similar, and there is places where there's overlap in what they are. But a repeating is just, is like this. A developing adds a lot of information. A building, really I think of it in terms of 3 stories or more. So you have a statement, and then because of what's been said, I'm adding something else into it. I'm adding in the picture, the ideas, and then again, usually it's longer than 2 lines, so I'm adding more and more into that. So this is also a better than proverb. Now, how can we tell it's a better than proverb? Because it says better than. It's really easy. There's 17 proverbs that are called better than Proverbs. And it's just simple comparison. You have one thing which is to be preferred over another. It is better than, and we see it in both lines. And so where is it in the second part of this proverb? Then, so the better in this case is omitted, but we rightly would read it, he who rules his spirit is better than he who takes a city. Proverbs are very brief, and often they leave out words from the first line that they expect you to read in the second one, that are part of the idea of the second one. And so, for time's sake, let me just mention 4 principles here that we can draw from this. Principles are, first, patience is better than great authority. The mighty one, the one who conquers a city, is one who has rule. He is a general, he is a commander, he is a king. He is one with great authority. He is one that has control over others. But what he's saying here in part is self-control is far better than control of others. Self-control is also better than military conquest. To conquer a city is one thing. And many, of course, throughout history have been acclaimed because they can conquer cities. But self-control, the ability, if you will, to master yourself, is better than the ability to conquer others. And the contrast that he's using here, the better thans, I think is intended to tell us something about what it is to control yourself, to have this patience. Is it easy to conquer a city? No. Is it easy to be a person of great power and authority? No. What is this old statement, uneasy is the head that wears the crown? It's not an easy thing. Self-discipline is difficult. It can rightly be compared to conquering enemies. It's a difficult thing. Power over others without power over self is powerlessness. It'll make it sound rather Confucian. Power over others without power over self is powerlessness. And so we can draw other principles from this, but those are 4 that I think are worth noting in this verse. What are some applications of this verse? How do we apply this verse, again, to our own lives or maybe to somebody else that we are ministering to? Just simply practice self-control. Be self-controlled. Seek self-control, seek patience more than political power. Because it really is genuine authority, genuine control. Is that self-control? And so I'm going to someone and I see the situation. Maybe they are saying something that it makes me mad. It's something that it may be something dead wrong. And that love that says, I need to listen before I speak. I need to hear and understand in the proverbial sense of trying to get the right information so I'm actually hearing. I care enough about this person to hear what they are saying and to respond rightly to what they are saying. So, one other one, and this is still on the political side, do not imitate the uncontrolled politicians. I might say the wise are not inflamed by political rhetoric. We live in a culture right now that thrives on rage and on bombast, on just stirring up stuff. And as Christians, should have no part in our life. We're not trying just to stir up a response to get people excited to click more or to talk about it, the church or us in any way. That we're not just trying to generate press. We're trying to communicate truth. We're trying to develop relationships with individuals. And so we practice self-control. And really at this point, we would bring back in everything I've already said in understanding what anger is and how we walk with patience. And so just a couple notes. Good sense produces patience. Proverbs 19:11 says, "The discretion of a man makes him slow to anger, and his glory is to overlook a transgression." It is good sense that produces patience, discretion. It is glorious to forgive. That's what that word overlook, that phrase overlook a transgression is pointing to. It's just forgiveness. It is glorious to forgive. Proverbs 15:18 suggests that serenity stifles strife. That when we ourselves are peaceful, he who is slow to anger allays contention. That we, by having a gentle, proper response, can help settle this down. Proverbs 25:28, again, talking about the man with no control is like a city without walls. Self-control is the greatest security. I think Tremper Longman sums this up very well. In the same way that the wise are sparing in speech, so they are sparing in emotional expression. That there should be a reserve about, in particularly rage. But part of what I think Proverbs points us to is that there is a reserve in our emotional expressions across the board. That we certainly are not just, whatever we feel we express. That is absolutely the way of folly, as Proverbs defines it for us. But rather that there is a sparing in that, so what we express is expressed properly in the proper time. And so that we, as we deal with anger and talk about anger, we're not just, I'm mad, I'm going to communicate it to somebody. I've got to vent, I've got to get it off my chest. But that we practice the reserve, the care, that we respond rightly. And ultimately, when we're dealing with anger, the solution to this gets back down to, in Proverbs anyway, a heart of wisdom. So it's not simply a matter of saying, don't get angry, control your temper, as Jim said earlier, count to 10. There's place for those instructions, but they're not the ultimate solution. The solution to a quick temper is biblical wisdom that is grounded in the fear of God and built on the fear of God. And when there is true wisdom, there will be less tendency to lose the temper. And so the solution here to being an angry fool is to be a self-controlled wise man, with an emphasis on the being wise.